Hey, this is Ihab, and I want to talk now about some of the tools that we use in Photoshop to make certain content blend in with the images that we're compositing them into. I'm going to start by importing a PNG image, hit OK, and let's say this works okay with this side or this side, probably on this side. I can definitely adjust that building in a way that it works better with that distortion that's happening from the lens. You can see here that there's some sort of consistency with these lines, which tells me that the horizon line or the vanishing point should be kind of like from here all the way here. So I'm going to use that as more like a ruler for me, and I'm going to hit Control T on the keyboard. If you just click the corner, it's going to give that kind of transformation. What I really want is by going and holding on the control, it allows you to actually distort that selection. Problem is that it might go off like to the right side. So I just want it to go shoot all the way up vertically. So what I want to do then in that case would be Control T again, free transform, then click and hold Control, and then click and hold Shift. This way you see that it's snapping, even though my mouse is far away from it, it's snapping on the vertical line, and therefore I'll keep going up. Let me zoom in now and hit OK, and now it's actually matching that line that I have right here. So I am copying that perspective. This way when I have that building there, it's kind of mimicking that distortion. But of course, because there is a big distortion going on here, where the lens is in the center and everything that goes further, it's going to be more and more distorted. I'm going to be using the same technique to adjust this building. So I'm going to use Control T and then click and hold Control, and then using Shift it's going to lock on. So you can see here it's like it's kind of acceptable. So I'm just going to hit OK, and then I'm gonna go right mouse button and change this into a rasterized layer, I suppose to Smart Object. So now I can modify it, I can erase whatever I want. In such a case, you never want to erase because you don't really know, like you might erase and decide, you know what, or maybe the art director would say to you, let's make this rise higher, and then you've already erased it. So for that reason, you want to use a mask for it. So by selecting the layer and you click on this button, now you can select on that mask and go with a brush. So anything you brush, you paint with white is not gonna do anything because white is the color of the materials that stay. But if you go and hit X to flip these colors, then black is gonna actually erase. And you'll notice here that once you're done painting, then the mask is gonna show more. And right now here is the material that I have, and of course I can just go here and lower the brush. Maybe I can select this layer and go to the opacity, lower the opacity a little bit, and then go back here, select, make sure that you are on that mask, and then in case, by the way, in case you lost contact of the mouse, you can hit the caps lock. It's going to show you as a cross. It's a bit easier to see this way, but what I'm going to do is just kind of zoom in, and again make sure you select on the clipping mask, and then you click and then go all the way here and click and hold Shift and then click. That's going to make one straight line from this point all the way to this point. And now when I go here to full opacity, you'll notice that I have this line that's going to guide me in terms of where is the line where I erased. And now I can hide the background. I can also, for my convenience, I'm gonna create a new layer. By the way, if you click on this button, it's gonna create layer above, but if you click and hold Control and you click on this button, it's gonna create a layer below. And what I want to do here is to go and change that color into super red. This way I can see really easily. And now I'm going to go into the polygonal lasso tool. So I can select here, click, go all the way here, click, click, double click. And then after I made that selection, I want to make sure again I am on that mask, and I want to fill that selection with black in order for me to get the mask to erase the materials here. So Alt and backspace, done. Control D, and then I'm going to show the background without this red color. And you can see some fuzziness here, and that's because it's either because the building itself, or it's because of that jagged line that the selection that I've made have created. So I would investigate that by going to the select tool, V for shortcut, and then push on the upper arrow. Apparently it's just because of the way the resolution is in this case. Okay, so now I can see this building better. I'm not too sure about the distortion. I might like to just have the distortion a little bit made like this way. Maybe it represents the distortion a little bit better, right? Now here's the problem. We've already worked so hard for like full minute or two on making that selection there, and now we have to redo it. Well, working smart is the key. So here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna duplicate this whole thing, drag it all the way here and copy, and hide this one at the bottom. I'm only keeping it for the sake of making a selection. So I'm gonna go to this one and hit Control T and make all the changes that I want. Let's say, all right, I am happier with this kind of selection now. All right, I am happier with this kind of distortion, and hit OK. And it looks horrible apparently. So I'm gonna go here on this layer, click and hold Control, and then with the left mouse button click. Check this out. It's making a selection based on the pixel information inside that mask. So I'm gonna go here into the other mask. So in that case, Control Shift I to invert that selection, and then again Alt and backspace, done. And now it looks like it has absolutely no connection to the image. That's because we have this beautiful orange sunset, but in the meantime this looks like it's coming out of a completely different photo. So for that reason, the first thing I'm gonna do is to erase this layer, and same for this red background. And then I'm gonna go into this one and I'm gonna make a copy of it just to be safe. And then on this one, I'm gonna select the layer, not the mask, the layer. And I'm gonna go to Image, Adjustment, and then I'm gonna go into Hue and Saturation. And now I can go into the hue and change the hue of that building. Now one thing you'll notice here that it's just kind of changing the color overall. But not in a way that it's sort of like, that makes it feel suddenly golden. Right? It's just kind of like shifting all the colors that are there. So what I want to do instead, since that approach did not really work, what I want to do instead is to first make sure that it has the right depth of color or the right shading. So Control L to go to the levels. I'm gonna go and play around with sort of like trying to create that kind of contrast that I can see here. Right, I can play around with the levels like from the sides, but usually you don't want to touch the beginning and the end that much unless you see a gap in here. So for me, I'm just gonna try and do that here with the middle area. You can also try the curves, but they do pretty much the same job. So now that I'm happy with this result, I am going to go and create a new selection based on that image by clicking and holding Control and then left mouse button. And I'm going to create a new layer. And I am going to go and copy some of that kind of golden shine color. Say something like this here. The way I copy colors in the fastest way, other than clicking I to pick with the color, I like to go into the brush, click and hold Alt, and it would just copy. So I'm going to go with Alt and backspace. So that's what it looks like. So I'm going to use this as a blanket of that golden shine color. So I'm going to hide it for now. I'm going to take this layer, I'm going to duplicate, and I'm going to use the hue and saturation on this layer. So adjustment, hue and saturation. And now I'm going to make it kind of golden to kind of blend in. Hit OK. I'm going to name this golden pass, I guess. I'm going to call this golden fill. So the golden fill looks like this, and the golden pass looks like that, and this is the original. So what I'm going to do is to take that golden fill and give it an opacity of maybe 20. So you can see here a subtle addition to it. Maybe make opacity of 30%. You can change the opacity from here. I like to use the keyboard numbers. So if I select on the layer that I want, as long as you are on the select tool, you can just hit 1 for 10%, 2 or 3 or 9 for 90%. So you can see it's a little too much here. So I'm just going to go and make it somewhat like that. And then finally, I'm going to show that golden fill here. And I'm going to also use the opacity to give that kind of haze of golden. If you want to go really detailed, you can just have that to apply for a certain type of selection here, maybe on the edges and things like that. But of course, you can just fiddle with it until you're really happy with the result. I also like about the use of the keyboard numbers is that it would show you the result right away. As opposed to changing the fill, sometimes you see the mouse is like, oh my god, it didn't catch it. Oh, now it's like showing. And sometimes it doesn't really update right away. So also it's a back and forth process, meaning that I can go here into the fill and say, okay, so this looks good. I could also try and use some blending modes. So you could just go and see whatever result that it's going to give you. I like to add some contrast to kind of match the effect that I'm getting from this one, from this building on the left. Also, I'm going to go here and name this original. I'm going to go to the original and go back into the levels again and see, like, is there anything that I can do to make it better? Blend better. If I go into the curves, you also want to keep in mind that when you have multiple layers here, you have the potential to change opacity, you have the potential to change the blending mode. So it's a back and forth process, and you know, along the way you might find just the right recipe, but it's a really case by case situation. And lastly, what I'm going to do, let's say I am happy with the result of this. It's still not really blending well, but I'm happy with their combination. I select all the layers, hit Ctrl E to merge them all, and then I'm going to go to the hue and saturation, shortcut Ctrl U, and then I'm going to go to the lightness and work on kind of hazing it out a little bit, just a tiny bit. So before and after. So Control U again. Maybe desaturate it just a tiny bit. Increase the lightness a little bit. And you can just go to the corners and paint more of some golden shine. If you want to be really specific, the windows would get a lot more reflection and would pick up more of the colors. And the other thing that I can try is duplicating that layer that I merged together, and then try again another variation of levels, hue and saturation, and then right away I would just change the opacity without really blending much. I would just play around with that, and it's working better, I guess, with this. A bit of a subtle change, but in the meantime I would always entertain the idea of changing the blending mode in a way that I can see some interesting results. And sometimes, like, some of them would do exactly what the normal would do, so I would always make sure that I got something out of that change. And again, I would just, after that, I would still go and try and see what would have happened with higher or lower levels. Okay, so looking at the image right now, it's still, I still don't feel that the new buildings really blend well. And I think that the color of the material of it should really be okay. But the main issue that or at least my eye is detecting, is that the windows should have some sort of like a reflection. That's why they look really weird, because these windows are showing some reflection, these windows are showing some reflections, and all of these ones. So my task right now, it seems like it's going to be a really annoying task, but I have to do it. And before I jump on making that task, I need to think and make sure that I'm going to do it in the most efficient way. So I'm going to select these two layers and then merge them, Control E. The next thing I'm going to do is to try and think of ways of making a selection for these windows in the easiest way. The luck factor that I can see here is that they all share a similar color, which is kind of blue. So let's try this. I'm just gonna hide this whole thing here. I'm gonna go to select, color range. I'm gonna zoom in and just gonna pick that color. If I increase the fuzziness, it's gonna choose a lot of that, which is not good. It's selecting even the structure. So I'm gonna undo, go to select, color range, and then I'm going to, if you click I, it's just gonna invert that black to colored version instead of black and white or grayscale. So I'm gonna go here and reduce the fuzziness. Maybe try this one here and hit OK. And to test if this looks okay, I'm gonna fill it with color. So I'm gonna go and add a new layer, hit D on the keyboard. Yeah, fill it with black or white. Okay. So I guess it's really fuzzy. That's the thing. So I'm gonna deselect now that I have this layer. This is what the color range has created for me. Create a new layer here, or actually here, and I'm gonna give it a super red color. Then it's gonna allow me now to see exactly what I'm about to erase. So this seems like a promising selection to make. So I'm gonna delete that red, go back here, and now because I have enforced a lot of that filling of the color, like I filled it over and over just because it was really fuzzy, now it makes a much better selection. You can see here that it's almost all white as opposed to this. So I'm only keeping that white only for the sake of making a good selection out of it. So I can hide it actually and create a new layer. And then I'm gonna go here where the white pixels are for that supposed reflection. Click and hold Control, click with the left mouse button, and now I have gotten those selections. And now if I go here, what I want to do is not to paint with the color, but instead what I really want to do is to copy the image here and reflect it on this. Okay, so I made the selection here and I bothered to make the selection to be good and whatsoever. I can easily go back and select it later, but I want to show you something else that is worth learning. If you go to the select, save selection, and I'm gonna call it Windows, and then hit Control D to deselect. And next I'm going to go to the main image, make a selection here, random selection, copy this, click and hold Alt and move it with the mouse, Control T, flip horizontally, and I'm gonna click and hold Control, and then with the Shift held down, I'm gonna do the same thing as keeping that kind of distortion on the vertical line. And I'm just gonna move it around just so I can get some good clouds. And then enlarge it a little bit and hit OK. And then lastly, I'm gonna hit Control Shift J. So that would be completely separate. Now, the last thing I need to do is to apply the selection that I had on the windows to mask that cloudy background for the sake of reflection. I'm gonna put this image on top, or layer on top, and I'm gonna call it reflected clouds. So right now I have these masks. I can simply just click and hold Control, and then with the left mouse button it's gonna make the selection. But for the sake of practicing more tools for selection, I'm just gonna go into these clouds and then create a mask for them. Go to this mask, select on it with the left mouse button, and then I'm gonna go to select, load selection. And now because I am on the mask, I need to deal with black and white. So I'm gonna go click Control Shift I to invert the selection. So the selected areas would be these ones outside, and then I'm going to fill them in with Alt and Backspace, meaning that I erased the selection outside the windows. I mean, you could have simply, without the mask, you could have simply just erased and whatsoever, and I didn't really need to use that much of the save selection and load selection, but for the sake of practicing those, I figured it would be ideal. Okay, just gonna investigate to see if the selection looks good. Yeah, the reflection is applying to all those windows. Yeah, so now I'm happy with the result. I'm gonna go right mouse button and then apply layer mask. So now that I'm happy with this reflection, what I want to do is to just go here and delete these ones because I don't need them anymore. And then here is the reflection. Now what I want to do is to try different blending modes. The first one that I would go with would be the add, but in this case it's way over the top, so I'm just gonna experiment with other ones. The other thing that I'm gonna keep in mind is that I wanna use these as reference because they have the same amount of illumination and also they're on the same level of that reflection. So I'm gonna keep working on toggling between these blending modes until I find something that kind of reflects on that reflection. That's a good pun, Ihab. Thank you. Okay, so let's see here, just kind of eyeball with and without that reflection. You can see that it does make a huge difference. And the human eye is very interesting. It just picks up the subtle little changes. And I'm sure that this is gonna seem off for many people, regardless of how much work we put into it. But we do our best to make it seem as seamless as possible. And finally, since I'm happy with the results of these two, I'm gonna select both layers, Control E, So that's gonna merge them, and I can deal with this later, that's no issue. But as far as now, this is something where I am happy with it.